I'm so privileged to introduce my guest today, one of the greats, pianist, musicologist, and educator, Professor Tibor Szász. He has given over 1,000 solo, concerto, and chamber music performances all over the world. His recordings of Beethoven, Chopin, Liszt, Mendelssohn, Schubert, and Bartók have been issued in the United States and Germany. Professor Szász holds a Doctor of Musical Arts in Piano Performance from the University of Michigan and is a tenured professor of piano at the Hochschule für Musik Freiburg in Germany. Professor Szász, it's really great to talk to you today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be talking with you.
I want to go right to the beginning. How old were you when you started playing the piano?
I was 4.5 years old. And I had a piano teacher with whom, a Hungarian piano teacher, Sarolta Tulogdi, with whom I studied until I was 13 years old, between 12 and 13, at which point I switched, thanks to a competition which I won. I was switched to study with a professor of piano at the local Conservatory of Music. She was, among others, a student of Alfred Cortot and Lazare-Lévy in Paris.
Is this Elisa Csollány?
Elisa, we say. Elisa Csollány.
Elisa
yes.
Csollány, right. And can I ask, was it a weekly lesson once a week, or is it multiple times a week when you were growing up?
Well, it was a weekly lesson, but Mrs. Csollány never looked at the clock, so sometimes our lessons went for hours. 3.5 hours would not be exaggerated sometimes. Not always, but, depending on how well prepared I was.
Can I ask you, when you were younger, before your second teacher, how much did you play? You mentioned you won a competition, so how many hours a day did you practice?
Well, to be frank, I was also influenced at times whenever my parents gave me some mandarins or oranges, then I tended to practice more. But I loved playing the piano. I was a little bit more of a music lover than a professional until about my teenage years. And then later on, I realized that music is indeed what I love the most.
Can I ask what kind of music you were playing growing up?
I would say I played the usual things that people in Europe were taught. I mean, I played sonatinas, I played dances, I played some easier pieces of the virtuoso type. And eventually, when I switched to Mrs. Csollány, then I started really playing very difficult repertoire. But up to that point, the most difficult thing I played, how about this? Actually, I was 8 years old when I had my first experience with playing with an orchestra. It was the Concerto from Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. And that was with the school orchestra. And it was part of in other words, I was not the only soloist. There was also another person being showcased. So that was my first experience with the Mozart Concerto.
Do you have, Professor Szász, do you have absolute or perfect pitch?
Yes, that's a very interesting story with me because I had perfect pitch, which at some point became very discomforting. And I'll tell you why. Because, for example, when I joined the choir of my music school, if the conductor didn't give us the absolute A perfectly, then I had trouble singing with them because I felt, that's not the right pitch what I'm singing. And then the second thing was that my grandfather, in whose home we had a old, very old Viennese type of piano. It was tuned almost half a pitch lower than the usual. And so I ended up eventually getting so messed up that I started transposing, trying to play the right notes, so to speak. So, I mean, I just couldn't do it anymore. And there was, most importantly, another issue. I don't know if you can imagine what this is like, but if you have absolute pitch, then all the notes are simply there. It's like a status quo. You don't feel any kind of emotional connection, whether the note goes higher or lower, or you don't have any kind of orientation. Feel you are simply playing or hearing or singing the right note. And that, at some point, I didn't like that at all. So I made tremendous efforts to get rid of my absolute pitch, to be able to
Wait a second. What did you say? Did you say get rid of your absolute pitch?
That's exactly what I said. I really made an effort to be able to, let's say, shut off this perfect pitch sensation and start really hearing the relative nature of music. And I tell you, it was a liberating experience for me. That doesn't mean that I lost my perfect pitch. It's just that I was able to hear in a relative sense.
What do you make, Professor Szász? Now, of course, historical performances, everyone is bringing in these old tunings, quartimento and all of this kind of thing. What's your perspective on different tunings? Because not everything, I guess different orchestras or different concert halls and different pianos, all tuned in different manners. Now you have perfect pitch. So what do you think about different tunings?
Well, I studied, let's see. How shall I phrase this? I was for many years a Duke University professor, and there we dealt a lot with performance practice. I was one of the professors dealing with performance practice. And at one point, and this was my most adventurous thing, I played a solo recital, which I started out on a harpsichord, then I moved on to a forte piano, and then finally to the modern piano. And cool. I can tell you it was the most excruciating experience of my life. Not so much moving from the harpsichord to the forte piano, but moving from the forte piano to the modern piano. I remember it had taken me quite a big pause between the first and the second half of the recital to readjust to the touch of the modern piano. And I started this with a Bach partita in B-flat major, the number 1, which is also the opus 1 of Johann Sebastian Bach. Then I moved on to the A major piano sonata of Mozart on the forte piano, K333. And then after the intermission, I played the tremendously large Rhapsody Opus 1 by Béla Bartók, which is a very romantic piece, and it's a tremendously difficult piece. So I never had problem with various tunings. In fact, I'm very sensitive to that, but I feel that the tunings are that's part of life. So I never thought that should be a problem. And for example, not too long ago, I purchased a Pleyel piano, and we have tuned it to a pitch level which some people would say it's the cosmic pitch or whatever. In other words, it's not 440, right, but it's 432.
Right.
You probably heard that
I've
there
heard
is
heard about that.
a natural vibration which is the one to which our body was originally tuned. And you probably know that, for example, Giuseppe Verdi and many, many singers, even today, there are many singers who advocate going back to this pitch level of 432. Well, I happen to be one of them.
Do you find there is a difference between 440 and 432?
Oh, absolutely. And it's not a matter of just a difference of pitch, because pitch affects everything. So the whole harmoniousness of music sounds different. Yeah, I could put it very easily that with 432, you really have a sense of harmony. And with 440 already you feel a certain disturbance. Something that makes you a little more nervous. I don't know how else to say it. But on the other hand, I'm so sensitive to pitch to this day, absolute pitch, I mean. I'm so sensitive that if something is slightly off, I tend to make completely misjudgments about what the pitch is.
Actually, one more question on pitch. So what is your perspective on equal temperament, where the fifths are and the thirds are a bit adjusted, whereas you can have more purer intervals in other tuning systems? What's your perspective on that? Like, for instance, just intonation.
Okay. I would like perhaps to take a little roundabout way, perhaps related to how you presented me in the beginning, as among others, as a musicologist. Well, I don't consider myself a musicologist. I just consider myself a musician who needs to know certain things which for him are practical things. And in this sense, I don't know if you know, I have a talk about Malcolm Frager. Malcolm Frager had also this kind of problem with the word musicologist. So when he discovered in Poland the incredible number of manuscripts of Mozart and of many, many other composers, European composers, then of course many articles were written about his discovery. And Malcolm Frager was absolutely furious that people called him a musicologist. And he protested to a very great degree. So now, going back to your question, for me, this question of pitch is something practical, and let me give you a few examples, and you might have a laugh at them. Well, one of the experiences was that shortly after I came to the United States in 1970, I was hired to be accompanist to a group of girls in a girl camp. I was supposed to play the piano, improvise kind of, to whatever the girls were dancing, and I was supposed to find the right kind of music. So that was one of the first experiences with dancers, and that went pretty well. But then many years later, I was hired by a ballet company to do a piece by using works by Frédéric Chopin, and this I had to play a total of 8 pieces by Chopin. Some of them easier, most of them difficult. It included also studies of Chopin. So what happened is they told me, well, we play such and such pieces, and then they mentioned that they had all of these recorded by the pianist Pollini. Well, if you know Pollini's recordings of Chopin etudes, I mean, the tempos are pretty fast, let's say. And so I told them, oh, no problem, you don't have to give me that cassette. I have those recordings at my home. I can just listen to them. And so we got to the first rehearsal, and we started one of the etudes. And after about 20 seconds, the dancers stopped and they said, excuse me, Mr. Szász, but, there seems to be a problem here. We are not together. Can we please start again? So we started 2-3 times and we could never get it together. And so then I asked them the question, is it possible that maybe the recording that you have because they mentioned that they had it on a cassette. So I asked them, can you please give me that cassette? And so it turned out that the cassette which they recorded and with which they practiced, it was almost half a tone higher than the way Pollini played it. So the only way we could do the concert, and I didn't back out. I said, fine, I'll learn everything that fast. So I ended up playing faster than Maurizio Pollini. And the concert went wonderfully. But you see, for me, this question of pitch, it's a practical thing. And I can feel, you see, I don't myself play pieces or instruments where I have the opportunity to use any of the tunings that you're mentioning. But if I hear one thing or if I hear another thing, I definitely very clearly and very strongly react to the differences. I wouldn't be able to tell you anything about the theory of these tuning things, but definitely my hearing is very sensitive.
I want to just quickly touch on improvisation. Did you improvise as a child growing up, or is that something you gained later, or is it something you did your whole life?
Okay, as a child, I did something which you could call improvisation. With my parents, it ended up a little differently. They used to say with a big smile on their face, and I understood immediately that big smile meant, look, he's wasting his time again. So they said, oh, look at little TV. He's how did they say it? He's fantasizing again. So this whole improvisational thing was not looked upon favorably by my parents. And of course, I can tell you, anything I did that, it was absolutely unstructured. It had I was not trained in improvisation. And much later, when I went to the New England Conservatory in Boston, United States, there I started taking some courses in what they called third stream music. And that was something like a combination between modern classical, such as Bartók, and then some jazz influences. And then for about a year and a half at the most, I had these spells of doing my own thing, but eventually that streak stopped. And I remember another experience which was typical of the way I picked up things. When I first went to the USA, I ended up in after New York, I went to Boston, and in Boston, I met Afro-American who told me and my friends, why don't I take you to a gospel concert? So we ended up in a huge arena with lots of people. We were probably the only white people in the whole audience, but I listened to all that, and then for quite a while I imitated the harmonies and the rhythms of whatever I heard. So I always had this natural inclination to imitate what I heard.
You are, of course, a great concert pianist. Did your peers and the people in your ambit, the other people in the classical field at that time, was there, I guess, a prejudice against improvisation? Was that looked down upon?
The truth is, it never even came up. We never did anything other than recreate music which was already printed on the paper. So improvisation was not at all a theme. Wasn't a topic. That's the truth. I know that may disappoint you, but
it's really important to know the history.
To tell you the truth about this. And for me, this whole thing with improvisation and what it means practically for me is having discovered, about my interest in the so-called il filo, the connecting thread in music. It was through this connecting thread that I finally came to study conscientiously this whole thing with partimento. And in this sense, I must tell you that I started teaching in 1971 already. And all my life, I had the feeling, and I couldn't say why, but I had the feeling that all the music of Bach, of Handel, of Beethoven, of Chopin, of Schumann, of Liszt, of Brahms, you name all these composers, that somehow it sounded to me most of the time as Italian music. Now, I didn't know why, but one thing is for sure, that as a child, I went to listen to operas a lot. I mean, I remember writing in my diary as a little child how excited I was to hear a performance with an Italian conductor in the city I was born. I mean, you have to realize in our city we had a Hungarian theater, we had a Romanian theater, we had operas, we had absolutely an incredible musical life. And I listened to all that, and somehow listening to all these Italian operas gave me the sense that later on, and I kept telling my students, you have to go and hear some Italian arias or operas to be able to play such and such. So this is how it became part of me, this Italian culture. And I was so sensitive to these things that, for example, when some colleague of mine played something and they came to a certain chord, and then I immediately, without knowing the rules of partimento, I could tell, that note there is not correct, and so on and so forth. So it was an intuitive.
There's one question before we move on into that. I do want to ask something because this kind of blew my mind. You actually toured with composer Bela Bartók's son in the USA in 1973. He lectured, you performed as a pianist. I really would like to know about that experience. And Bartók, of course, is Hungarian. You're Hungarian. Can you tell me about that whole experience and the connection to Bartók?
Yes. Well, for starters, I should tell you that I didn't like Bartók when I first heard it. I pretty much hated it. And then at one point, about 1964, I went to listen to a George Enescu international festival and competition. And I heard there somebody playing the Allegro Barbaro of Bartók. And of course, this Barbaro thing, that was a euphemism of Bartók's, because apparently what happened is that some critics who were in the audience when they performed one of his works, one of the critics apparently made the remark, well, what can you expect from a nation of barbarians? so basically, Allegro Barbaro meant for Bartók, Allegro Ungaro, or Hungarian Allegro. so that piece just impressed me so much. And then what happened in 1967 is I went to listen again to the Bela Bartók Franz Liszt international piano competition in Budapest, and there I met the curator of the Bartók archives, László Somfai. And László Somfai was so nice to me. he allowed me to tape, actually, on magnetic tape, every single performance of Bartók, including performances of his which were actually sealed under, they were sealed because they belonged to certain people, but the Bartók archives felt that if we don't now transfer these Edison cylinder recordings, the Edison cylinders, they after a number of decades, they started disintegrating. So they were saved, they were put on tape, and I recorded all that. And with this Bartók as a pianist, as a performer, because these were Bartók playing mostly music of his own, but also music of Liszt, of Chopin, of Mozart, all kinds of things. Bartók was an extraordinary pianist, but interestingly, his style, his pianistic style, had absolutely nothing to do with modernism. His style was totally romantic, because he was studying with a student of Liszt. And so if you hear Bartók's, even when he plays his own music, it sounds like romantic music. So this interest, of course, eventually led to my going to the United States. And it so happened that the son of Béla Bartók, his name was also Béla Bartók Jr. See, what happened is, there is a little background clarification I must make. My grandfather was the bishop of the Hungarian Unitarian Church in Transylvania. And because Béla Bartók Jr., he was already educated in Unitarianism, because Béla Bartók first, originally, he was to some extent involved with the Catholic Church, but he became, practically speaking, an atheist, and he even said about himself he is an atheist who is more honest and more than many of these religious people, but so he switched his religion to become a Unitarian, and because of this Unitarian connection of mine, I was put in touch with Béla Bartók's son, and then I found out that there was a concert tour that was supposed to be organized. And the organizers decided on two pianists. One was György Sándor, and the other was I. So this is how it happened that Sándor and I went to tour with Béla Bartók's son in 1973.
Well, Béla Bartók, he was born in the 19th century, 1881, and he passed away, I think it's 1945. That's 3 years before you were born. So was his son a bit older then at that point?
Well, his son certainly was older than I, and what's interesting is I remember my first meeting with him. I was waiting in Boston at the train station, and when the train pulled in, we see in the window, and we just couldn't believe our eyes. We thought we were looking at Béla Bartók. This son of his, it was a total look-alike of his father.
Wow.
But look-alike, yes, but he had absolutely no idea about music. He was completely, dead ears, practically. I remember another little story of mine, how in the 1970s, 1970 was when I ended up in Madison, Wisconsin in the summer to study there in a summer academy. One of the teachers was Paul Badura Skoda. And I went to the local music store and I saw a LP, long play recording, which claimed to have recordings of Béla Bartók recorded on the Welte piano player. The Welte piano player was invented in the very city in which I teach now, in Germany, in Freiburg. So already in 1906, they were releasing commercial these piano rolls, which you then put into the mechanism, and then they played back these recordings. So when I saw this recording, of course I purchased it, and when I met then Bartók's son, I told him, I have a recording of your father playing on these piano players. And Bartók's son was absolutely adamant. He says, there is no such thing. My father never made such a recording. The whole thing is just nonsense. And then I told him, look, I have listened to all the recordings of Bartók, and I have good enough ears to tell you that is indeed your father who is playing there. And he still didn't believe it. So I said, okay, look, I'll make a tape of this LP which I have, and you take it back to Budapest, to the Bartók archives. Let the Bartók archive people decide if this is Bartók, your father or not. And of course, the Bartók people acknowledged that was indeed his father playing. And the only thing that was wrong on the recording was the date. They gave the date of 1920, and that's not when the recording was made. It was made much later, and it was made actually in the United States, because what happened here is that the manufacturing factory of these piano rolls here in Freiburg, they were not only bombed, but after they were bombed, the owner has actually set fire to all the books and all the documentation so that it wouldn't arrive into the hands of the occupying forces. And he hid a huge number of piano rolls somewhere in the Schwarzwald. And so many years later, an American has got wind of this thing and came to Germany and has purchased a great number of these piano rolls, including the piano rolls of Béla Bartók. And then he took them back to California, and he played them back on a Welte machine. And here you have to understand another little issue, namely, because Welte destroyed all the documentation about how these rolls are to be played back, the Americans, when they won the Second World War, they said, okay, all this Welte thing belongs to us. And they appropriated, without any question, all the rights to it. In fact, they didn't even consider any rights. They just said, this is ours. But then they found out that they had no way of playing back the rolls. And so what they did is they invented themselves a new system to play back the rolls. And this is actually a blessing because, believe it or not, the American system of playing back the Welte rolls was far superior to that of the German system. So the recordings of Bartók were played back using this American system of reproducing the rolls, and they are just fantastic. I mean, some of these recordings sound so good that it's almost, I mean, you can still hear it, but it's almost as good as a live performance of Bartók, and they are fantastic.
I want to talk about your Carnegie Hall debut. You were mentioned in the New York Times by Donald Heinemann. He said, he proved to be quite a pianist, nevertheless with the agility and power to storm excitingly through the double octaves of the Liszt Sonata and to take from the wrist the even more difficult double octaves in the finale of Beethoven's Waldstein Sonata in the style of such virtuosos as Emanuel Ax and Vladimir Horowitz. So can you tell me about that debut?
Well, this is the 1977 concert, which I gave in the Carnegie Recital Hall. which was reviewed by Mr. Hanahan, and someone who was very familiar with New York concert life told me, because if you read the rest of the review started something like many young pianists, who starting to make a big splash in New York, bring very difficult repertoire, and they play it very virtuosically, and that's where he introduced this comparison of mine with Emanuel X and Vladimir Horowitz. But basically, he tried to tone down his praise by saying, that I'm one of these young pianists who is trying to make a big splash in New York. So you have to read the whole thing. I mean, critics have a way of making sure that if things are not going to work out in the end, then they can also say, well, you see, I already told you back then that he was just trying to make a big splash.
There's the mention of Horowitz there. This is in New York. Did you ever meet? And he was alive into the 80s. Did you ever meet Horowitz?
Yes, not only I met him, I even played for him the whole Liszt Sonata.
Whoa!
Yes, those were the years when Horowitz visited Ann Arbor, Michigan. And he did in Ann Arbor something which he didn't do in any other city, namely first he played a full recital, and then he played a concert with the orchestra, and he played the Rachmaninoff Concerto No. 3. And what happened is, he came to not only to play, but he also accepted the idea, which was suggested to him, and it was very kind of him, to say, okay, I will listen to a few pianists who are studying in Ann Arbor. And so that's how I ended up playing for him the Liszt Sonata. And next day, when I told my teacher, whom I was studying with at the time, that I played actually for Horowitz, he said, what did you play? I said, I played the Liszt Sonata. He practically told me in so many words, you idiot, don't you realize that Horowitz has to play that piece? I mean, so you see, then I understood why Horowitz was so nervous the whole time.
You played it so good.
Because he was to play that piece like in the next few days. So that was the most stupid thing I ever did.
What did he say about your performance? Did you get to talk to him?
Well, that's you can understand that he was simply so nervous that he just didn't say a word about the whole thing. And I now understand why. I never thought, if I had known that Horowitz was actually a very nervous person before playing concerts, I didn't know that. I thought, I didn't think anything about the whole thing. But he was very, very, very nervous, and he didn't make absolutely no any comment. And then I did something worse, because in the after all his concerts, then he came and had a master class, which he gave us the possibility to ask questions. And stupid me, what question did I have to ask him? I said, Mr. Horowitz, you have all these wonderful transcriptions of your variations on Carmen. When will you publish them? And he got so furious. His wife
he's got to chill out.
His wife had tried to calm him down. And his answer, I cannot tell you exactly how he answered, but basically the meaning of what he says, why are you asking me this question? What is your point of, why are you asking this question? Do you think that if I'm going to publish this one of my transcriptions, do you think that that's going to be something more authentic? And then he said, pretty much in the vein that what would it mean authentic? Because every time I play my Carmen variations, I play differently. So what's authentic about it? There is no such possibility to call it authentic.
He went off.
Yeah, he really just bang,
Yeah.
slap on the person who asked.
He's got to chill
question.
out. I mean, come on, it's just you're a student.
Yeah. No, but I mean, he made a very good point because this man indeed, with every performance of his, there was a sense that the music is being created at the time when he plays. And this is getting back to your question about improvisation. What does improvisation mean for me? For me, improvisation means, as a pianist, that I play the piece in such a way that the audience will have the sense that I am creating that piece of music as I play it. And everything I try to play, I play it that way.
I have a question. You're Hungarian. Does that give you greater insight into Liszt's music?
Well, let's first of all, Liszt did not speak Hungarian. He spoke best French, then German. He knew a little bit English, but I mean, his music, to me, I told you already earlier, most of what Liszt wrote to me sounds like Italian music. I'm sorry. So there is very little where I would say that he is approaching the Hungarian idiom in his later works. For example, there is a piece called Csárdas Macabre. Well, this Csárdas Macabre, Csárdas is a folk dance, and so the idiom is definitely Hungarian, and he does in this late piece. You sometimes, if you wouldn't know it, you could believe it. If somebody told you that was written by Bartók, you would say, yes, it sounds like Bartók. So, but that's as far as I would go.
I haven't even begun to scratch the questions I want to ask you. So let's quickly move on.
Okay.
Let's talk about your Beethoven article, which is figured bass in Beethoven's Emperor Concerto, basso continuo, orchestral cruise, or both. You talk about the controversy of Beethoven's figured bass notation in the concerto score. Now, why was there a controversy about that?
You are asking me a question which is not very pleasant to answer. But see, I was in touch with three people who have brought out so-called Urtext editions of the piano concerti of Beethoven. The first one was Hans Werner Küten, the second one Paul Badura Skoda, with a score of the fifth piano concerto where my name is even mentioned. Actually, Küten also mentioned as my name. And the third one is Jonathan Del Mar. Well, all three of them mention my name, but all three of them don't do what I was hoping that they would do. And I tried with all three of these editors to get them to publish these concertos of Beethoven the way that Beethoven meant that music to be read from his notation. And he made his notation in the Emperor Concerto so clear. He notated when the pianist is supposed to play with both hands, when the pianist is only playing with his left hand, when the pianist is not playing at all. There were all kinds of detailed notation of what the pianist is supposed to do. And if you now compare this to the general idea that musicologists are saying that continuo gradually died out. I mean, why would Beethoven suddenly, in his fifth piano concerto, write all his details if continuo was dying out? I mean, was he crazy for doing something that nobody was any more interested in? No, it's because he wanted people to do everything about this concerto the way he imagined that it should be done. And why did he do that? Because before that, he had a performance of the Fantasy Opus 80 for piano, orchestra, and choir, the great fantasy in which we hear already premonitions of the Ode to Joy from the Ninth Symphony. And he was also performing the Fourth Piano Concerto. And well, as it happened, that in the fantasy, at certain point, and this is all very perfectly documented, we know exactly the measure, so to speak, where the orchestra and Beethoven went apart. And Beethoven, instead of playing, he jumped up and he started waving his arms, and he knocked down the two boys who were holding the candles. And then the whole audience started laughing extraordinarily. I mean, it was a fiasco of extraordinary proportions. And so Beethoven decided at that point he's never going to play again any of his piano concertos. And that is why suddenly in his fifth piano concerto, he wrote out everything. In fact, let me give you an idea of a sense of how precise Beethoven was. Originally, Beethoven wanted to write Italian words to the effect that in the first movement there is a cadenza to be played, and he wanted to write just the words, play this cadenza. But then he must have realized he can write all he wants, play this cadenza, but back then, everybody was playing their own cadenzas. So how will Beethoven make sure that people don't perform their own cadenzas? Well, this is how shrewd Beethoven was. He included then, in the final version of that cadenza, he included the horns. So in other words, there was no way of playing your own cadenzas, because in your piano cadenza, you had to play together with the orchestra.
Can I ask you this question, Professor Szász? Did Beethoven abolish improvising cadenzas in concertos?
Well, see, what happened is, because of this precise cadenza being included right into the score, which was, by the way, most unusual for that time. In fact, if you look at Mozart's cadenza, there is one single cadenza which Mozart entered into the full score autograph manuscript. And strangely enough, that's the Concerto K488 in A major. And this cadenza that Mozart wrote into the score, it has been criticized by countless musicians, saying, hey, there is no theme there, it's all just arpeggios and chromatic scales, and there is nothing to show off with. That's a terrible thing, we don't want to play that. So for the first time in history, Beethoven wrote out every single improvisational thing about what the soloist was supposed to do in the fifth piano concerto. And from then on, this became such a fixation in the world of composers that after Beethoven, nobody ever dared anymore to leave the cadenza to the improvisation of the soloist. So practically, yes, Beethoven abolished the improvisation, in the sense that by writing in, because of his deafness, or in any case now some people say, well, he wasn't really deaf, he was just pretending to be deaf and all kinds of things. But whatever it is, him writing in this cadenza meant that you no longer improvise. I mean, who has ever heard of anybody improvising their own cadenza in a Schumann concerto or a Brahms concerto? Absolutely no. So that was the end of improvisation.
I think one interesting statement in the article is the disappearance of continuo and the romantic concerto coincided with the concomitant disappearance of the double exposition. Could you talk about that?
Well, this is, of course, it has a context, and I'm talking about a certain context, a certain piece, a certain thing that happened. But see, I would have to see exactly in what context this thing appears in my article. Right now, I'm not quite sure that. See, I wrote actually 2 articles on Beethoven's concertos. I wrote one article which deals with all the concertos and the masses. And in this article, I talk about notation on the one sense and what that notation means on the other sense. And then I have a second article, which I wrote only on the Emperor Concerto, in which I then analyzed what exactly was Beethoven trying to notate. So I don't know. You see, this double exposition thing, I mean, this was the norm that we start from at home, then we wander off places, and then we get back, and you see many composers at some point they decided that this double exposition thing is actually a little bit tedious. Let's just for example, in some of Chopin's works, we have the so-called first subject actually is never heard when the first subject is coming back in the recapitulation or in the re-exposition, but we go directly into the second subject. So this indeed is a general tendency. It doesn't mean that there were no composers who recapitulated, but even if they did, they tried to do something different when they recapitulated that exposition.
Here's what Robert Levin had to say about your articles in Basso Continuo. Tibor Szász's treatment of Beethoven's use of continuo in the piano concertos and masses is most valuable. He's a well-known Mozart improviser. Do the two of you know each other?
We know each other very well. In fact, Robert Levin was on the committee that hired me in Freiburg to become a tenured professor.
The art and the skill of knowing Basso Continuo has, I guess, decreased in the 20th century. Did you find that other than Robert Levin, were there other concert pianists who were familiar with this skill of being able to read figured bass and knowing how to implement it?
Yes. Well, you see, this topic of figured bass came into the consciousness of the 20th century with a book by Eva and Paul Badura-Skoda called Interpreting Mozart. And you should know about this book that parts of the book were written by Mrs. Badura-Skoda and parts were written by Mr. Badura-Skoda. And so I know for sure, I met the person who was editing most I could say editing the book as it was going to be published, and that person told me, by the way, be aware that not everything was written by the same person. Some chapters were written by the Mrs. Badura-Skoda, some by Mr. And I know for sure that the Continuo article was written by Mr. Paul Badura-Skoda. Now, I don't agree with the way Mr. Badura-Skoda goes about this Continuo. And then I came upon recently this new edition of this book, and I read one statement in it, and it just seems to me to be a most irresponsible statement. And that sentence just is this: the better the orchestra, the less continuo playing is necessary. I mean, can you imagine what now look, I don't know really who wrote this sentence, because right after this sentence, it goes on to say, Paul Badura Skoda has tried different approaches and made many practical experiments. Well, excuse me, if this one was written by Paul Badura Skoda, as for sure the original was written by him, how come he now suddenly talks about himself as Paul Badura Skoda has tried? So it sounds to me like perhaps Mrs. Badura Skoda entered this sentence here about the better the orchestra, the less continual playing is necessary, because you can imagine the practical meanings of this. It means that if I now play with a conductor and if I start playing continuo, that means that I'm telling him he's just a bad conductor.
And the orchestra is no good.
And and the orchestra is no good and the conductor is not so.
Well, you actually quote C.P.E. Bach, who said, even in heavily scored works such as operas performed out of doors, where no one would think that the harpsichord could be heard, its absence can certainly be felt.
Yes, this is a most important thing. You see, most of the people never heard the difference between a performance of a Mozart or Beethoven concerto with or without continuo. And I can tell you from experience, because ever since I knew about continuo, I always played all my performances with continuo. And it always took a little bit of nudging until the conductor, you see, we studied, I told them always, look, let's just start, and then if it bothers you, let me know. Well, it turns out that they were not bothered. In fact, I got letters from conductors saying, I really miss performing with you. I just loved what you did with the tutis and all this.
Well, that's astounding. I mean, is this, you are doing it, and you obviously, I'm sure you try to teach your students this. Do you find that this is a minority, that this is not the norm, essentially?
Well, see, conductors have two great egos. They wouldn't want the pianist to be doing something while they are doing their tutti, and the pianists are too full with their egos. They wouldn't want to share their solo stature with doing accompaniment for the orchestra. There is too much ego involved in all this, and of course the saddest part for me is that all these three editors, for different reasons, have actually not printed the basso continuo of Beethoven the way Beethoven intended it.
Isn't Urtext supposed to be very authentic?
Yes, but you see, Urtext is always in the hands of an editor. And if the editor decides that the figured basses of Beethoven mean nothing other than orchestral cues, then such an editor feels the right. He can just completely ignore in print that which Beethoven wrote. And this is what happened with the first editor, Hans Werner Küten, who published all the Beethoven concertos, and there is absolutely no continuo in the score. Then the second one, which was just the fifth piano concerto of Beethoven, here Paul Badura Skoda was honest, and he tried to put in all the figured basses. But see, what happened is the Eulenberg publishing house didn't have all the fonts necessary to show what Beethoven wrote. So many things are missing in this edition of Paul Badura Skoda. And then we have, to me, the most unfortunate thing is the edition in Bärenreiter of Jonathan Del Mar, who, on the ground that he found certain mistakes, there is no question that there are mistakes in these early editions, in these first editions of the Beethoven concertos. So based on this idea that he found mistakes in the first editions of Beethoven, he decided to publish the Beethoven's Basso Continuo in small print. Now, in a small print, to anybody who knows the meaning, it means, well, maybe you want to play it, maybe you don't. It's So the thing is, in Beethoven's time, it was absolutely clear, and the fifth concerto, it's absolutely clear. The fifth concerto in the first edition has large prints for that which is supposed to be played by the pianist, and small prints for the cues, because see, back then the pianist led the orchestra along with the first violinist, so there was a joint leading between first violinist and pianist, and so the pianist also needed to have his cues, and the first violinist got their cues. So and all of this, I mean, now that, can you imagine? I will make to you a comparison. Imagine all the notes in a score, the large print, of a certain color balls, and the small prints are different color balls. And now imagine that you have this edition of Jonathan Del Mar, where everything that is in the tutti is colored with the same ink. In other words, with small print. So you can no longer differentiate between what is continuo and what is not continuo. And of course, his excuse is, because there are mistakes. So basically, he threw out the baby with the bathwater. And that is the sad part.
I want to end off on the topic of il filo, which I think is a really great topic. And is it the entrance and exit of every composition? Is that in the first few bars of a tune? And can you define what il filo is actually?
Yes. The il filo appeared in a letter of Leopold Mozart to his son, in which he coaxed his son into publishing more works of smaller size, but of quality. And one of the quality statements was this il filo, which is like a connecting thread. And what il filo means, and this is the difference between a theme and an il filo. You see, when you have a theme in a piece, that theme is something which has integrity. You don't chop it apart. But what il filo means is, if you are a musician who understands something about composition, then you can see within that theme, you can see what I like to call them building blocks. And these building blocks then, which you find within the opening measures of a movement, are the building blocks with which the composer then creates the rest of the piece. That is the difference then between a theme, which is something, a unit by itself, and the il filo, which there are many threads, because there are many building blocks within the opening theme, and these many threads then are going to be popping up in all the movements of the piece.
Are these building blocks something like certain contrapunctal patterns that you just know, you see them all the time in scores, and they're like recurring ideas that, like, for instance, you were telling me just earlier that you could predict chords just because you've heard so much music that you could almost predict where pieces go. Is it something like that?
Well, the building blocks are of many different types. You can have melodic types, you can have rhythmic types, you can have harmonic types, you can have coloristic types, register, high register, low register. All of these things are variables which affect a piece of music. So I don't really know how else to answer your question.
I guess a good question is teaching students this. How do you get better at developing this ability for il filo?
Okay, let me give you another sad experience of mine. I've been now trying for many decades to get students to be doing the basso continuo in the piano concertos, and my experience is always the same. I find out that these students don't have any experience playing chamber music. So whenever they try to do something like continuo, immediately you can tell these people have never or very rarely have played with other peoples. In other words, they cannot incorporate the things they play in such a way that they sound like a normal part of the music. It sounds always something that is external to the music, and that is absolutely no way. I mean, I played so much chamber music in my life. Many of these orchestra members with whom I played and I did the continuo, they were smiling at me during the performance because they loved it. I basically was able to lead the orchestra, even though the conductor was there, because you see, if you are a good continuo player, you get your message across. You can still let the conductor do all the tempo and all the beating of the measure, but you can still get through in such a way that you influence the performance.
Next question. So how does a student learn basso continuo? What's a good way, or general bass?
Well, the best way would be, and I wish this would be introduced in the curriculum of every university, there are about 12 times, let's see, 4 is 48. There are 48 symphonies of Haydn for which basso continuo realizations were created. Now, 24 of these continuo realizations were created directly by Solomon, who was the first violinist and who played with Haydn, playing at the fortepiano, the basso continuo. So can you imagine that you are in England with Haydn in there and Solomon there, and Solomon is doing the conducting with his violin bow, and Haydn is playing at the fortepiano, and Solomon hears what Haydn is playing, and then he publishes a chamber music version of the Haydn symphonies, where you have the strings, and you have a flute, and you have the basso continuo realization of Solomon. I mean, fantastic. I mean, if people were taught these things as part of a chamber music curriculum, I mean, there you would have the possibility of doing some chamber music. But without chamber music, you can't do continuo. You can immediately tell this person just doesn't fit into the ensemble.
You actually kind of stepped into usually the last question I usually ask everyone, which is, how would you reform music education? And you're a very experienced educator. How would you change music education? Young kids, high schoolers, conservatory undergrads, what would you like to see really as a part of educational reform in music?
Yes, my answer is one and the same for all ages. You see, we start always with the idea that in music there is such a thing as identity. For example, we have at the entrance examination of practically every university in the world, and every school of music and every whatever, some music theorist goes to the piano and plays you a do mi sol chord and asks, what do you hear? And the person says, C major. And what is that? Yeah, it's a consonant chord. Well, I asked the question, how do you know it's C major? How do you know it's consonants? Or they play a C, E flat, G, and they say, okay, that's a C minor, and that's a consonant chord also. Well, excuse me, there is no such thing. In music, we don't have any identities. You cannot put your finger on one particular thing and say this is that. Because in music,
context,
identities can only, exactly, you got it, context. It's only through context that we can define identities in music. And that identity, by the way, could last for only as much as a fraction of a second.
Right. Because
at the next moment, you already have something different. For example, there is this famous piece I like to tell my students. There is an F minor prelude of Bach, which goes well, you have there 2 times F A flat, And you say, well, if it's F A flat 2 times, then it's the same thing, times 2. There is no such thing in music, because in music, the second F A flat, which Bach wrote, that already has a different bass under it. So it has a totally different meaning. So you cannot talk about such things to me as saying, oh yeah, that's the same F A flat. No, it's not. So if people were made to understand that in music we are dealing with the art of contextualization, that's when we begin to become musicians, and that should be the basis of music education. And this whole thing of playing a chord and asking the student, what do you hear? I mean, this is the biggest nonsense ever.
Well, I mean, the great Professor Tibor Szász, I mean, he's really one of the great pianists. He claims he's not a musicologist, but I mean, he's written some great articles, and he's a fabulous teacher at the University of Freiburg in Germany. Professor Szász, I mean, I could have had you on for 2 hours, 3 hours. Why don't we come on again soon? Because really, so many questions for you.
I'll be glad to talk more with you. And I very much appreciate your very well-informed questions about the topics. You have given me a chance to express some of the painful things in my life as a musician.
If people were interested in your work, if they're interested in listening to your recordings, to your lectures, your articles, where can they find you?
Well, they'll find me certainly on YouTube. I have lots and lots and lots of recordings, and they can find my writings in academia.edu or at ResearchGate. By the way, whatever I write about music it always has a practical side to it. And that's why I don't like to think of myself as a musicologist, but as a practical musician. Thank you very much, Mr. Hogan.
Thank you, Professor Szász. Talk to you soon.